Chapter 65. Probably the untimely yelling from the loudspeaker had too much impact on Shi Yan, and he couldn't tell what Shuyi was thinking right now. And what Shuyi said really made him unable to accept it. After a moment of silence, Shi Yan took Shuyi's hand and decided to skip this link directly. It's getting late, let's go home. Well, you're right, it's getting late. Unexpectedly, Shuyi followed his words and nodded, it's time to go home. If something goes wrong, there must be a demon. Shi Yan stood still, looked at her carefully, and made sure that she really stopped making trouble, so he called the driver to come over. However, as soon as he got into the car, Shuyi said, go to Thailand Mansion. Thailand Mansion is the community where she lives. The driver didn't think much of it and stepped on the accelerator directly. Shi Yan glanced sideways at Shuyi, pursed his lips and loosened his tie, then carefully asked knowingly, aren't you going home? Shuyi turned her face away and didn't look at him. Go back, I'll listen to you. Go back to my own home. Shi Yan stared at her for a moment, then withdrew his gaze, and calmly instructed the driver, but his tone was undeniable. Go back to Shuyi Bay. The driver said yes, and turned the steering wheel again to make a U-turn. Upon seeing the complaint, Shu immediately raised his voice and said, I want to go back to Thailand Mansion. The driver was at a loss while holding the steering wheel, and looked at Shi Yan from the rearview mirror. But this time, Shi Yan just nodded calmly. Okay, listen to her. Shuyi. She turned her head in surprise, saw that Shi Yan was also looking at her, and immediately looked back, pretending nothing happened. Unexpectedly, there was no expected hard work to persuade her to stay, not a single word. Will you die if you coax me a little more? Shuyi was even angrier. Holding her breath and reaching the gate of the community, Shu got out of the car angrily, walked 2 steps into the gate, and found that Shi Yan was following her. Turning around, she was caught off guard by Shi Yan's eyes. In the twilight, the frame of his lens is dotted with flashes of light, but it is not as attractive as his eyes. When he stared straight at her, it seemed as if the whole world only saw her in his eyes, and his deep eyebrows and eyes revealed a few traces of blazing heat that can only be seen during intimacy. In this large crowd, he didn't say anything, but he gave a look that seemed to be flirting. Shuyi blushed for 2 seconds in disappointment, then turned around abruptly. It is reasonable to suspect that he will not coax people, but only seduce. At the elevator entrance, Shuyi walked in, and Shi Yan followed her silently. The elevator slowly ascended, and neither of them spoke. Until a few seconds later. What are you doing? Shuyi raised his chin awkwardly. I'm going home, what are you doing now? Why not? Shi Yan stood by her shoulder, as if she was just a neighbor who happened to meet in the elevator. I'm going to sleep in pink sheets for the night. Shuyi, have some face, do I agree with you to spend the night at my house? Then what should we do? Shi Yan stood up straight, but held her 5 fingers calmly. You really won't come home with me. No return. A few seconds later, Shuyi shook off his hand with the last of his strength. Shi Yan, let me tell you, I am a person who cares about face. You made me so ashamed in front of my idol today. I will never end with you. After finishing speaking, the elevator door just opened, and Shuyi walked towards his house. In the empty corridor, her high heels stepped on loudly. In short, let's do enough momentum first. But standing at the door, she suddenly stopped. He reached out to touch his clothes, then the hem of his trousers, and then stopped moving. Shi Yan stood behind her, looking at her in his spare time. After a long time, he said with a smile in his voice, why, pray again. Shuyi. She didn't say anything, turned around and walked towards the elevator again. Shi Yan was very face-saving this time. He didn't ask her anything, and followed her footsteps again, without showing any impatience. It's just that when Shi Yan went downstairs to hold Shuyi, she didn't shake off his hand. He just buried his head, still full of anger. Even after getting into the car, Shuyi quietly shrank in the corner without saying a word. The reason is that I ran too fast to the hospital today and didn't bring anything except my mobile phone. As a result, the half-hour runaway plan was declared a failure. What do you want to eat tonight? After arriving home, Shi Yan took off his coat and walked towards the kitchen. Shuyi didn't look at his whereabouts, turned his back to him and walked towards the room, and said indifferently, I don't want to eat, I don't have an appetite. Shi Yan rolled up his cuffs, and said unhurriedly, really don't want to eat. Next time I have time to cook, I don't know when it will be. Shuyi paused, leaned back, turned around like a compasses, and saw that Shi Yan was already standing by the cooking table. Apologize to me. Shi Yan nodded calmly. Is it possible? Shuyi, that depends on how your cooking skills are doing. Shi Yan finally had a smile in his eyes, and turned to open the refrigerator. It should be okay. What do you want to eat? Shuyi, full Han banquet. In the end, of course, the banquet failed to make a full meal for the Han dynasty, but a simple 3 dishes and 1 soup. But after tossing and tossing for a while, most of Shu's anger dissipated, and he sat down with a sense of face. I'm not very hungry either. If it doesn't taste good, I won't settle for it. Shi Yan, yes. However, Shuyi was stunned for the first mouthful of soup and cabbage, and silently lowered his head. Hate that the taste buds are too disappointing, hate that the mouth is out of control, and hate that Shi Yan still hides its killer. Half an hour later, Shuyi looked at her clean rice bowl, wiped her mouth with a tissue, and said, forget it this time. If you lie to me again in the future, even if you become a Michelin chef, I won't let it go. Shi Yan put down his chopsticks, served her a bowl of soup slowly, and said, actually, I'm not lying to you, am I? Shuyi's eyes froze, and he thought about it carefully. It seems to be too. Shi Yan never said Song Lilan is not my sister. Then you know that I like her so much, but you don't tell me. But Shuyi still felt a little uneasy after thinking about it. You don't even mention such a big matter. Didn't I mention it? Shi Yan pushed the soup bowl to her. Last time I accompanied you to eat noodles, and I asked you if you wanted to talk to her. Shuyi was instantly brought back to the memory of that night by Shi Yan's words. The picture of the laughter that day was still in front of my eyes, but after the truth came out, it turned into black and white. Then your sister doesn't work in your company. What does she usually do? She just sings and dances every day, nothing else. Why are you laughing? Nothing. Then show me the photos, I'm a little curious. I don't have a picture of her. Shuyi gradually clenched his fists. Time banquet. Hearing that something seemed wrong in her tone, Shi Yan paused for a moment before raising his head. But before he could speak, Shuyi saw the same smile in his eyes as that night. At that time, she still thought affectionately that he would be very happy because she had dinner with her. It turned out to be watching free comedy. What's wrong? Shi Yan asked softly. Shuyi stood up abruptly. You are really annoying. Seeing her angrily running back to the room without even putting on her shoes, Shi Yan rested her arms on the back of the chair, relaxed all over, and then laughed out loud. However, 3 hours later, when Yan finished his work and was about to go back to his room to take a shower, he couldn't laugh anymore. When he turned the lock for the second time, he tried a little harder, but he still couldn't push it open. Locked, Shi Yan raised his hand and knocked on the door. Book meaning. No one answered. Book meaning. Are you asleep? Calligraphy. After waiting for a while, a voice finally came from inside. The sofa in the living room is big, and the pillows in the guest room are soft. You can choose. During these 3 hours, Shuyi felt like a fool, rubbing the pillow happily at one moment, and scratching her hair in anger at another moment. The happy thing is that she has such a close relationship with the big star she likes. It's her boyfriend's sister. The kind of sister who can sit and eat together and give her red envelopes during the Chinese New Year. This is something that Shuyi never even dared to dream about. I was so angry that she did such a stupid thing the first time we met. Shi Yan was still watching, knowing that Song Lilan appeared behind her without reminding her. Being ashamed under the dual identities of her boyfriend's sister plus idol, Shuyi still has goosebumps thinking about it. During these 3 hours, Song Lilan was not idle. The matter has come to this point, the photos are ironclad evidence, and she can't do any more unnecessary struggles. Even if there is a 1 in 10,000 possibility, the media did not find out the relationship between her and Qin Xiaoming through this photo. This is also a black spot that the two of them will not be able to clean up in the future. After weighing the interests of many parties, at 10 o'clock in the evening, Song Lilan chose to disclose this secret that had been buried for more than 20 years. The moment the copy was sent out, apart from Weibo, programmers, and entertainment media staff who had already returned home from get-off work collapsed. It's only 10 minutes, but everyone who has used the 4G network knows the news. The relationship between the characters behind Qin Xiaoming is not complicated. As soon as the relationship between the two was announced, the media naturally knew that Song Lilan was Shi Huaman, Shi Wenguang's daughter, and Shi Yan's sister. When every social software exploded, Shuyi had almost digested the matter, and was sitting cross-legged on the bed, applying body lotion. But she is not pure. First, Kong Nan called to check with her again and again whether she was dazzled, and then Bai Ruoshan called and screamed. Really, Song Lilan? It's actually your boyfriend's sister. Bai Ruoshan was too excited, her voice was so loud that it was harsh. Shuyi threw the phone aside in disgust, turned on the hands-free, and continued to apply body lotion. It's true, but you should also calm down, it's about to burst my eardrums. How can Bai Ruoshan calm down? If you suddenly found out that your best friend's boyfriend is the younger brother of a well-known celebrity, can you calm down? Besides, she was drinking with friends at the moment, the alcohol was on her, and the gossip was too violent. It would be nice if she could finish a sentence. Shuyi, you are so uninteresting. How dare you hold back such a big matter from me? Shuyi sneered, you may not believe it, I only found out today. Bai Ruoshan, this is impossible. Shi Yan didn't even tell you this. It's too much. Yes. As soon as Shuyi mentioned this, he became angry, and slammed the cover of the breast milk and threw it aside. I'm locking him out now, and he can't come in until he calms down. As soon as the voice fell, the door lock of the room was turned suddenly. Shuyi was just stunned for a moment, and Shi Yan pushed the door open and walked in. Still holding the key. Almost a subconscious reaction, Shuyi immediately jumped out of bed to chase away people. Did you come in? You go out, I'm still angry. This time I have prepared for the banquet, so I won't be pushed away by her inadvertently. Seeing her waving her paws in front of him a few times, Shi Yan simply grabbed her hand, hugged her horizontally, and threw her on the bed. With a plop, before Shuyi recovered, Shi Yan leaned over and put his arms on her shoulders. The disordered breathing due to the struggle has not yet calmed down. The moment he looked into Shi Yan's eyes, Shuyi suddenly held his breath. The bedroom was warm, and the light was as dim as a veil, making Shi Yan's eyes deeper and deeper. He looked at her quietly, his eyes sparkling. Being gentle to the extreme is a kind of seduction. After a while, he reached out and brushed the hair off Shuyi's cheeks, and asked in a low voice, how can I calm down? Under his aura, Shuyi felt that the air was a bit thin, and he felt tense due to lack of oxygen. Shi Yan moved closer, breathing on the tip of her nose. Talk. At this time, Bai Ruoshan's unscrupulous voice suddenly came from the cell phone next to the pillow. Ha, it's not easy. It's a one-shot to wipe out all kindness and enmity, Mr. Shi. This moment. Shuyi suddenly owned several sweets, all of which she dug out with her toes. Chapter 66. After Bai Ruoshan finished speaking, she clearly felt a strange silence on the other end of the phone. So even though the alcohol had ruined her mind, she hung up the phone consciously. After the busy beep sounded, the air in the room seemed to stop flowing. If the time could be turned back 10 minutes, Shuyi would definitely not answer this call. If she could go back 7 years, she would definitely apply to the counselor for a change of university dormitory. But at this moment, Shuyi couldn't make any other expressions other than being stiff. Looking at Shi Yan on his body, he even forgot to blink his eyes. The smell of Shuyi's body milk was all over his chest, with a faint fragrance of magnolia. Shi Yan didn't speak, but just looked at Shuyi. His eyes seemed to say, what do you think of the proposal your friend said? Not so good. Shuyi looked away. Afterwards, Shi Yan's kiss fell on her earlobe. Almost forgot, this man has a habit of kissing earlobes. Shuyi half struggled and stretched out his hand to hold him back. Shi Yan, at least let me lose my temper. Not only did he not finish his temper, but he didn't even finish talking. However, Shi Yan was a little bit self-aware today, knowing that he was the one making the apology, so he kissed tenderly and tenderly. Even breathing was lingering, and the entanglement of lips and tongues quickly defeated Shuyi, and the whimpering rejection turned into a temptation. When she couldn't help hooking Shi Yan's neck with her hands and raised her chin to respond to him, the day's game officially came to an end. By the time Shuyi had room to catch his breath, the nightgown had already been piled up to his chest. There was obviously no wind in the bedroom, but Shuyi felt that the chandelier was shaking, and clasped Shi Yan's back with his 10 fingers, sinking into his flesh little by little. Every nerve is no longer under his control, and his eyes are gradually blurred. Only Shi Yan's blurred outline and clear and desire-filled eyes fell into sight. She opened her mouth halfway, and the senses in her whole body were filled with boiling water again and again, as if soaking in a turbulent hot spring, and the low moans of Shi Yan or herself lingered in her ears. The chandelier was shaking more and more. Shuyi lay under Shi Yan. Although his limbs had strong points, he felt that he was as precarious as the chandelier. She is ashamed to face herself reflected in Shi Yan's eyes, but every time she closes her eyes, she will be stimulated by Shi Yan's deliberate behavior to open them suddenly. He seemed to enjoy the extra eye contact with her at times like this, or maybe just to watch her fall for him. Not only did he want to see it, he also wanted Shuyi to see it. So late at night, Shuyi's handprint was also left in front of the full-length mirror in the cloakroom. The sound of the clock became very clear in the late nightclub, mixed with the sound of water in the bathroom. It set off Shuyi's indignation to the extreme. She huddled into a shrimp under the quilt, with her back facing the direction of the bathroom, unable to recover for a long time. Who is apologizing to whom? Does Shi Yan really have any remorse? But she dared not say that. I am afraid that after I have said it, someone will sincerely ask to give him another chance when I am not a human being at night. This grievance can only be endured by oneself. But after deciding to forgive Shi Yan for deliberately concealing her behavior, Shuyi was only as happy as a dream about Song Lilan. The next morning, almost everyone from the elevator hall of the office building to the company was talking about it. Shuyi silently sighed in his heart that his idol is really popular, but on the face he sat down at his desk calmly. Although Kong Nan got the exact news yesterday, seeing Shuyi, who has actual contact with Song Lilan, feels like seeing Song Lilan himself. She came over with a cup of coffee in her arms. No one will believe me when I tell you that I have been a colleague of Song Lilan's daughter for several months. Huh? Shuyi asked in surprise, you even know this? Ah. Kong Nan gave her an unbelievable look. Sister, do you think it's still the era of the 2G network for all people? The daily activity of those gossip forums has reached a new high. All the relatives behind Song Lilan have been found out. Now who doesn't know that Qin Shiyue is her daughter? People in the company didn't know Qin Shiyue's family relationship before because they didn't care much. Who has nothing to do to pick up the identity of a colleague. But once contacted with an entertainment star like Song Lilan, people's desire to gossip instantly increased by several orders of magnitude. In just 2 or 3 hours, the character relationship diagrams of Song Lilan, Qin Xiaoming, Shi Wenguang, Shi Yan, and Qin Shiyue were all done. Out. Shuyi didn't know how to respond for a while, so he just said oh twice. For Shuyi, there are not many people around her who know about her relationship with Shi Yan, so she feels that the incident about Song Lilan's eating melons has little to do with her. However, this idea only lasted one morning. After lunch, Shuyi and Kong Nan went downstairs to buy coffee, and when they came back, they felt like they were watching her all the way. What's wrong? Shuyi stopped next to a female colleague's desk and asked, is there something on my face? This female colleague actually didn't want to gossip about other people's private life, but Shuyi took the initiative to ask her, and she couldn't hold back. Is your boyfriend Shi Yan? Song Lilan's younger brother. Shuyi. She turned her head to look at Kong Nan, and Kong Nan waved his hand immediately, indicating that she hadn't said anything. But since a colleague asked, Shuyi didn't intend to hide it deliberately. How do you know? The female colleague looked around and after confirming that Su Yuling hadn't come, she pulled Shuyi aside and said in a low voice, it's Su Yuling who said that you were with Qin Shiyue's little uncle. Isn't Qin Shiyue's little uncle Shi Yan? Shuyi. She didn't expect that the rumor Su Yuling made for her would be self-defeating in such a way. Presumably Su Yuling himself was staying up late last night to eat melons, so he didn't have the nerve to come to the company today, so he directly asked for a few days of annual leave. Thanks to Su Yuling's blessing, in just one afternoon, Shuyi had a new identity on various social software. I have a colleague who is Song Lilan's younger sibling. But when colleagues came over and curiously asked Shuyi about various gossip about Song Lilan, everyone found that this person was just keeping his mouth shut as always, and he didn't know everything. This is probably the self-cultivation of celebrity family members. Only Shuyi knew that she really didn't know anything. The real close contact with Song Lilan again was the weekend 4 days later, when the Shi family routinely went back to the old house to have dinner with Shi Wenguang on this day. For Shi Yan, this is an extremely ordinary day in life. For Shuyi, this was the first time she officially met Shi Yan's family. Okay. After Shuyi changed into the 6th set of clothes, Shi Yan couldn't hold his breath and walked into the cloakroom. He looked at the woman in front of him and couldn't help laughing. Actually, you don't have to dress so plain. Shuyi looked down at her beige slim sweater dress, feeling a little uncertain. Are you two vegetarian? Do you think I'm old-fashioned? Before Shi Yan could answer, She immediately went to look through other clothes, then I'll look at other clothes. Time banquet. He stretched out his hand to grab Shuyi. I think it's pretty. It doesn't matter whether you think it looks good or not. Shuyi shook off his hand and muttered, God knows what kind of impression I have in your sister's heart. I can't leave a bad impression on your father anymore. Shi Yan was a little helpless, seeing Shuy's busy appearance, but also wanted to laugh. You are so grand, it puts me under a lot of pressure. What will I do when I see your parents? Shuyi paused in front of the hanger, ignored him, and continued to choose clothes. When she picked up a light-colored dress again, Shi Yan said abruptly, I like you, and they must like you too, so relax a little and don't be nervous. After finishing speaking, Shuyi stopped picking clothes. After a while, she turned around slowly. What did you say? Shi Yan simply repeated the key points. You relax, it's just a meal, don't be nervous. Shuyi shook his head. It's not this sentence. Shi Yan raised his eyebrows, looked at Shuyi for a moment, looked into her bright eyes, and suddenly understood what she meant. But he was leaning against the bow tie cabinet, as if he didn't hear her words. He just raised his chin and said softly, Go and change your shoes. Quick, say. Shuyi stepped forward to hug his arm, looked up at him, last sentence. Shi Yan had no choice but to lower his head, stare into her eyes, and said word by word, I like you. I like you too. Shuyi was satisfied and happy, and the speed of dressing up instantly increased several times. It was only after arriving at Shi's house that Shuyi realized that she really didn't need to be nervous. Needless to say about Qin Shiyue's relationship with her, Qin Xiaoming is somewhat familiar with her, and Shi Wenguang also had a few words with her in a forum last year. On the whole table, Song Lilan was probably the only one who could be considered a stranger. But after careful calculation, the number of times Shuyi saw her in various concerts and TV shows was second only to Qin Shiyue and Shi Yan. So, during this dinner, Shi Yan watched helplessly as his girlfriend moved closer to Song Lilan's side. Unknowingly, Shuyi passed an empty seat without anyone noticing, and sat next to Song Lilan, staring at her the whole time, not knowing what her boyfriend was. Shi Yan has nothing to say. After dinner, Song Lilan set off to work in another city. Shi Yan and Shuyi were not in a hurry to leave. They chatted with Shi Wenguang and Qin Xiaoming. Qin Shiyue couldn't understand what they were talking about, and couldn't sit still. She walked to the French window and looked at it. She suddenly thought of something, and she turned around and called, Little Aunt. Shuyi. I was really embarrassed to call her that in front of Shi's family all of a sudden. After a long while, Shuyi turned around in embarrassment and asked, What's wrong? Qin Shiyue didn't notice her embarrassment at all. She looked out the window and said, The cherries are fruiting, do you want to pick some? The others at the table didn't seem to notice Qin Shiyue's words, and didn't even glance at her. Shuyi breathed a sigh of relief, and said calmly, I'll accompany Xiaoya to pick cherries. Yeah. Under the dining table, Shi Yan squeezed Shuyi's hand, pick some more, and take them home to eat. Then he turned to look at her and silently said 3 words. Shuyi clearly recognized his mouth shape. Little Aunt. 2 searchlights were turned on in the yard, illuminating the figures of the two as picturesquely. The 2 cherry trees are not tall, and they can pick them with their hands. Are you going back to work? Shuyi was holding a basket, picking plump cherries, while chatting with Qin Shiyue. Now the whole company knows who you are. Prepare to watch. Qin Shiyue sighed, Hey, can I not go? Although the car accident last time was not my fault, my father and little uncle both think that I have too much time to do so much. In fact, Shuyi thinks so too. Qin Shiyue stepped on her feet and pulled a branch, and the old god said, Anyway, they are busy themselves, so they don't see others being idle. Shuyi picked up a basket of cherries for her and said, Actually, if you really don't want to go, then don't force yourself. It's more important to do what you like. I still have to go. Qin Shiyue said, People can't just idle around all their lives, and I don't know what I like. Shuyi raised his eyebrows, and said with a smile, I can't believe that you actually said that. It's not what I said. This was what you said the day she had a car accident. But thinking of the conversation with you that day, Qin Shiyue felt a little heavy, and didn't want to mention it again, so she asked, You said, if a man has no weaknesses, how should he attack? Who is it? Shuyi asked, You. Qin Shiyue nodded with her lips pursed. I really can't understand this man, like a mystery. Why do you want to know a man? Shuyi glanced back at Shi Yan in the living room and snorted softly, "You might as well go to Tsinghua University if you have this ability." "Then what should I do?" Shuyi immediately asked humbly for advice. There is absolutely no place to break through, and I feel like a primary school student in front of him. Shuyi, who considered himself very experienced in this regard, pointed out 4 fingers, for words, stalking. Shuyi didn't expect Shuyi to be so simple and rude. "Can it work? Do you think this trick will be useful for you? Why is it useless? Is he difficult to deal with, your little uncle?" "That's how I chased your little uncle." The moment they finished speaking, the two froze at the same time. Shuyi seemed to see a question mark growing on Shuyu's head with his naked eyes. "The little uncle you're chasing is mine, little uncle."
Welcome to Storyverse. If you have any novels you'd like to see or stories you'd like to share, feel free to leave us a comment or send us a private message. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our community of avid readers and romance enthusiasts.
Chapter 67. Shuyi also tried to quibble. But Shuyu's IQ seemed to have risen suddenly at this moment. Without giving Shuyi a chance to explain, he suddenly asked 3 times. "I just said, why did he like a woman at night? He went to Qingyan during the Chinese New Year. Oh, I met you near his house before, and I said, what are you doing there at night?" Shuyi. Now it was her turn to have nothing to say. In the living room, Shi Yan took off his coat, half leaned on the sofa, his whole body was loose, and he had no idea what his girlfriend was going through. "But, why my little uncle?" Shuyi hugged the little cherry basket tightly, her eyes were full of puzzlement. "Didn't you say it was your ex-boyfriend? What, that mistress? What the hell am I talking about?" Okay, shut up." Shuyi felt that his lie probably couldn't be substantiated, so he simply confessed to her, "I just got the wrong person. I thought Shi Yan was that person's little uncle." "Wrong person? Can this be wrong?" Shuyi, yes, although it's embarrassing, but the truth is, I made the wrong person." Shuyi opened her mouth, was stunned for a while, and then said, "Then, that little uncle, does he know?" Shuyi lowered his head and nodded heavily. "I don't know what Shuyi will think, and I don't know if he will be angry with her. If she is really angry, she can't even coax a man. How can she coax a woman?" After a long silence, Shuyi remained silent. Shuyi looked up and saw her staring blankly at Shi Yan in the room, wondering what she was thinking. And she couldn't say anything, quietly waiting for Shuyi to digest the matter. As if sensing Shuyi's gaze, Shi Yan turned his head and glanced at them, then got up and walked towards the yard. Shuyi remained motionless, as if petrified, watching Shi Yan walk step by step without blinking. He held Shuyi's coat in his hand. Pushing open the door of the yard, a gust of wind blows head-on. Shi Yan frowned. "Why aren't you wearing a coat?" It was Shuyi who asked. She touched the tip of her nose and said softly, "Forgot." Shi Yan put the coat on her straight away, and by the way, looked down at the cherry in her hand, and said with disgust, "It's so small." Shuyi subconsciously picked up the basket, and did not forget to shake the pot. "I didn't pick it." Maybe Shuyi couldn't see it, but Shuyi clearly saw Shi Yan smiled. Gentler than the wind on a spring night. It was a banquet she had never seen before. "Hurry up." Shi Yan's smile was fleeting, and he turned back, getting ready to go home. Shuyi, oh. After Shi Yan's figure completely disappeared, Shuyi went to see Shuyi again. She was still as dumb as before, but her eyes were different. Shuyi felt that the way she looked at her now seemed to be admiring. "So," Shuyi muttered, "he knows everything, so he didn't kill you." Shuyi, in a society ruled by law, be careful what you say. It was indeed difficult for Shuyi to digest this for a while, but she found a blind spot. So stalking is really so useful. On the way back, Shuyi held a box of washed cherries and handed one to Shi Yan. "Eat." Shi Yan glanced at the driver in the front row. "Don't eat." Shuyi got used to it, and silently withdrew her hand, as if nothing had happened. At this time, Shi Yan asked again, "What did you say to Shuyi today?" Shuyi, Shi Yan, when we left, she was a little out of her mind. You are quite careful. Shuyi lowered his head and ate the cherries by himself. Then I'm a little unhappy now, have you noticed? Shi Yan glanced over from the corner of his eye, looked Shuyi up and down, and smiled suddenly. Shuyi didn't bite a cherry. Why are you laughing? Shi Yan didn't speak. At this time, Shuyi knew that he couldn't ask anything. All the way to Betrayal quietly, Shuyi started looking for plastic wrap as soon as he entered the door. She bowed in front of the locker, rummaged through it, and said, "Can cherries be stored in the refrigerator? Will they go bad when I get up tomorrow?" The people behind did not respond. Shuyi turned around but saw Shi Yan leaning against the table, pinching a cherry and putting it in his mouth. "I just told you to eat but you didn't eat it." Shuyi suddenly stepped forward and took the box. "Why are you like this?" "Because I don't like cherries." Shi Yan spoke indifferently but snatched the box from her hand. Shuyi was a little confused. "Then what are you doing now?" Shi Yan stretched out a leg, blocked Shuy's way, and then pulled her in front of him. "But I want to see you eat." He was laughing when he said this. It was completely different from the way he smiled in front of people. The burning light in his eyes was clearly a seduction. At this moment, Shuyi quieted himself and Shi Yan seemed to be a goblin and a scholar who took the wrong script. When he held the cherry and fed it, Shuyi subconsciously bit it. After eating more than a dozen of them one after another, she raised her head and looked at him with a smile. "Because I look beautiful eating cherries." Shi Yan smiled but did not admit it. "No, Shuyi. Because you want to taste the cherry flavor. The sweetness of the cherries in the mouth is indeed different from every previous kiss. There is no mixed desire, pure kiss, like playing a game, you come and go, a bit childish, but it makes Shu want to stop." Shuyi hugged his neck, kissed him and then smiled. She felt a little itchy, couldn't help but leaned back her upper body. Shi Yan hugged her waist, leaned over and followed her movements to chase after her. Shuyi half closed his eyes, and saw that Shi Yan was also smiling. That night, they played with the little box of cherries and wasted a few hours. The spring night is long, and the moonlight is light. The person in front of her hugged her silently. There is no verbal promise, but Shuyi feels that the lingering minutes and seconds tonight are the epitome of their future. At the same time, Wang Meru, who was far away in Qingyan, lagged behind the young people for several days, and only belatedly noticed that many people in the circle of friends were forwarding some links about Song Lilan. Naturally, Wang Meru also knew about this person. After all, there were so many CDs collected by Shuyi at home. After clicking in and taking a look, it turned out to be gossip. Teacher Wang has no interest in the right and wrong of the entertainment industry, and plans to quit after just 2 pages. However, as soon as she moved her thumb, her eyes suddenly fixed, and she felt that the appearance of a young man inside was very familiar. After all, it is not difficult for a person who has been a head teacher for decades to remember a freshman in a class for a month or so. It is not difficult to think of Shi Yan's face. She adjusted her glasses, took a screenshot of this scene, and sent it to Shuyi. Before taking a bath, Shuy's phone suddenly beeped twice. "Breeder, yo, isn't this your boyfriend?" Shuyi, "Wow, you saw it too." Shuyi, "The information is so developed that people all over the country know it. Recently, people come to ask me every day, and I am so annoyed." "Breeder, you are quite deep into the drama." Shuyi, "Mom. He is really my boyfriend." Wang Meru didn't return to Shuyi, she must have fallen asleep. Shuyi didn't bother anymore, put down her phone and went to take a shower. When Shi Yan came in, the phone on the bed was ringing. He looked down at the WeChat caller ID, and knocked on the bathroom door. Bookish Shuyi was taking a shower with music playing, so he didn't hear his voice. And the phone kept ringing. Shi Yan didn't think much, and pressed the answer button. "Wang Meru, you haven't slept yet, what are you doing?" "Shi Yan, she is taking a bath." Suddenly there was no sound from the phone. After a long time, Wang Meru spoke again. Her voice was as serious as the dean of their school. "Who are you?" Shuyi didn't rush to dry her hair after taking a shower, and came out in her pajamas. While wiping her hair, she asked, "Were you talking just now?" Shi Yan sat on the sofa and glanced sideways at her. "Well, I answered a phone call." Shuyi let out an "oh," and was about to go back to blow dry her hair, when she suddenly heard Shi Yan say, "I answered your call." Shuyi didn't reject Shi Yan's answering her call, and asked casually, "Who is looking for me?" Editor Tang. "Shi Yan, your mother." Shuyi. She turned around slowly, her expression became cautious. "What did she tell you?" Shi Yan didn't understand the meaning of what Wang Meru said to him at the end, so he could only repeat it verbatim. "She told you to wait, she is on her way to find Andy Lau." Chapter 68. Shuyi immediately called Wang Meru back. Although it was late at night, Wang Meru obviously couldn't sleep peacefully for a while, and the phrase "I am Shi Yan" still lingered in her ears. So when she picked up the phone, she didn't know how to speak, so she could only ask, "Finally finished taking a shower?" Shuyi, Why are you calling late at night? You're not too annoying. Wang Meru snorted coldly, I'll just ask if you're going home on May 1st. Shuyi clutched her phone, glanced at Shi Yan beside her secretly, and said in a low voice, I know what you want to do. Qingyan is a tourist city, and it is very difficult to buy tickets for the National Day every year, and the roads are crowded, so Shuyi and his family have basically reached a consensus not to go home during this holiday. For Wang Meru to ask this question, it is natural that the drunkard's intention is not to drink. Wang Meru, don't worry about what I want to do, just tell me if I want to go home or not. Shuyi didn't answer her, but covered the phone again, and took a few glances at Shi Yan. Shi Yan was leaning against the head of the bed, flipping through the magazine in his hand, and took a moment to look up at her. What's wrong? In order to cover up his embarrassment, Shuyi lifted his chin and cleared his throat. Are you free on May Day? No time. The sound of turning the pages of the book engulfed Shi Yan's short answer, I have to be free. Shuyi couldn't hold back and kicked him, can you finish speaking in one breath next time? Then he turned his back to him and let go of his hand covering the phone. Got it, let me take a look. There's been a lot of things going on recently, come back when you're not busy, and I'll let you know when the time comes. It is probably a prophecy. A week before May 1st, things came like a flood. Shuyi is so incapable of splitting up, even Qin Shiriwa, who goes to work and fishes every day, was caught by her to help. When Wang Meru called to inquire, Shuyi didn't have time to wear earphones. He clamped the phone with his shoulder and said while sorting out the documents in his hand, I really won't be back. I've been very busy recently, and I'm going to have a mid-year assessment soon. Really? No time. Wang Meru said impatiently, okay, that's okay, then you go to work, the female university will not be retained. After hanging up the phone, Shuyi quickly put the matter behind him. The last day of the May Day holiday. This was Shuyi's only rest day during this holiday, and Shi Yan was still on a business trip abroad and came back in the evening. She didn't want to go anywhere, she lay at home for half an afternoon, and suddenly ran to the kitchen on a whim to prepare for cooking. Although the two of them usually don't start a fire, the aunt who cooks comes to feed them on time every day, so there are always fresh ingredients in the refrigerator, but it is one thing to have all the ingredients and pots. Whether it can be turned into a complete dinner in Shuyi's hands is another matter. 2 hours later, the refrigerator was more than half empty, but only 3 dishes were cooked successfully. Okay, Shuyi took off her apron and said to herself, it's pretty good looking and fragrant. Shi Yan, how many lifetimes of blessings have you cultivated? Edison's light bulb experiment failed more than 1,600 times, and Shuyi failed 5 or 6 times, so it was nothing. It's just that she doesn't bother to tell the world about the sweat behind it. While arranging the dishes, footsteps came from the entrance. Shuyi was overjoyed, wiped his hands casually and ran outside. You are back. The tone of the sentence suddenly changed at the last word, as if it had changed from surprise to fright. Because it wasn't just Shi Yan who appeared at the door, and her own mother, Wang Meru. Shuyi didn't even close his mouth, he was stunned for 3 seconds before speaking. Mom. Why? Wang Meru pulled the suitcase and took 2 steps forward. I haven't seen you for a few months, don't you know me? This tone is her own mother's fault. Shuyi finally regained his composure, glanced at Shi Yan resentfully, and obediently went up to help Wang Meru carry the luggage. Why did you come here together? I met you at the airport. Before Shuyi wondered why they met each other suddenly, Shi Yan reached out to take the suitcase from Shuyi's hand, smelled a smell, and turned around and asked, have you cooked? Shuyi nodded. When Shi Yan pulled the suitcase and left, she asked in a low voice, Mom, why didn't you say anything? Wang Meru, is it still called a surprise inspection? Shuyi, it's really a common problem of the class teacher. She pointed to Shi Yan, you haven't met, have you? Why did you come here together? Shuyi might not believe it, but her mother and her boyfriend met at the airport without any bridge. Just relying on a face that is exactly the same as Shuyi, and another face that is no different from the photo. I haven't seen it before. Wang Meru crossed her arms, looked at Shuyi's living environment silently, and said flatly, I recognized him at the airport and said hello to him, so we came here together. After finishing speaking, she turned her head and squinted at Shuyi. It's nice of you to live in someone else's house and not tell me anything. Oh, you didn't tell me when you went to Singapore with the group in the 3rd year of high school. Shuyi muttered in a low voice, you told me you went to New Pengpo. As soon as the banquet came out, the conversation between the mother and daughter stopped immediately. Wang Meru became that kind teacher Wang again. Since the two of them came all the way from the airport, Shuyi didn't know how long they chatted. Anyway, there is no cold silence as she imagined. But after all, it was the first time they met. Wang Meru always looked at Shi Yan with a scrutiny attitude. Until the meal is served, she took a few bites, and the scrutiny in her eyes seamlessly turned into love. Do you usually eat this? Wang Meru thought for a while. Forget it, it's healthier than takeaway. In a word, it extinguished the confidence that little cook Madame Jing had found for herself compared to Edison. I don't eat much, Shi Yan said calmly. I usually do the cooking. Wang Meru nodded with satisfaction. Thank you for your hard work. Shi Yan, sweetness is like sweetness. Shuyi, I've only eaten one meal made by you. Do you want some face? Although Shuyi was caught off guard by Wang Meru's sudden appearance, after all, he hadn't seen her for several months, and Shuyi still missed her very much. What's more, Shuyi was very moved to come over from such a long distance to meet her. Even after dinner, Wang Meru said that seeing her boyfriend felt good, so she felt relieved. She had to go back to Qing'an in the evening, and she had to go to class tomorrow, so she wouldn't bother her. Thinking of her mother being in such a hurry, Shuyi almost cried out with a sour nose. Shi Yan looked at her from the side with a half-smile. Is it a person who can still laugh on this occasion? People tend to lose their rationality when they are emotional. When Wang Meru was about to leave, Shuyi hugged her for a long time and reluctantly sent her to the train station. Until the person left, Shuyi still looked at the station sentimentally. After a while, her emotions gradually calmed down and her rationality returned. She returned to the car, looked at Shi Yan belatedly, and asked, but why did you meet at the airport? Good question. Qing'an is a small city without an airport, so Wang Meru should not have landed at Jiangqing International Airport when she came to visit her. Shi Yan held the steering wheel, pursed his lips tightly, but there was a smile in his eyes. Say it. Shuyi shook his arm. Didn't you come back from France? How did you meet at the airport? Because, Shi Yan said the most hurtful words in a gentle tone. Auntie just came back from a tour group in Malaysia and needs to transfer to the high-speed rail in Jiangqing to return to Qing'an. Shuyi. After all, it was a wrong payment. She took a sharp breath, holding back all the tears. Go home. There has never been spring in Jiangqing. After a few days of coolness in May, the temperature rose sharply to 35 degrees, and lasted until June, with a tendency to climb. The air conditioner in the office building was turned on very low, and many girls covered themselves with blankets during their lunch break. In the silence, Qin Shuriwe heard a sound of keyboard, raised her head in a daze and asked, Aren't you resting? Shuyi typed quickly, Let me adjust the PPT. Qin Shuriwe, what PPT? Shuyi looked around and whispered, Report on work. Regarding the promotion, although his colleagues were well aware of it, Shuyi still adhered to the principle of not making it public beforehand. Otherwise, hope is easily dashed. Qin Shuriwe became a little interested, sat aside and watched for a while, then sighed nervously. Shuyi asked her, What's wrong with you? Qin Shuriwe supported her head and said weakly, I think you use ideal type should be a girl like you. Hush. Shuyi motioned her to shut up. Don't say this in front of your little uncle, it will kill me. Qin Shuriwe smiled and said, That's right, he's so stingy. Entering the final stage, Shuyi adjusted the format and asked, Why did you say that? Well, last time I had a car accident, didn't he come to the hospital? Qin Shuriwe changed his posture, held his face in his hands, and stared at the computer blankly. I was so ashamed at that time, wasn't I? Thinking of how Qin Shuriwe yelled at the driver who caused the accident that day, Shuyi couldn't help laughing. Actually, it's not embarrassing. I think you're doing the right thing. No matter who you are or why, you should always be responsible for your actions. Yeah. Qin Shuriwe patted the table excitedly. I asked him if he thought I was fussy, and he said the same thing. Shuyi took a sip of coffee, but didn't answer. I just read your job report, and I think you are the one who is responsible for yourself. I'm just a salted fish. Xian Yuyue drooped her eyebrows and lost hope for the future, but the more I can't get it, the more motivated I am. What should I do? Shuyi, is he very indifferent to you? Qin Shuriwe froze for a moment, blushed suddenly, and silently lowered her head. It's not very cold. Once she was partying with friends and met you at the bar. With the ambiguous dim light, Qin Shuriwe looked at you blatantly. However, he left within a few minutes and never came back. Shuyi drank a lot of wine in depression, and it was almost early morning when he left. But when he got to the door of the bar, he found you sitting in the car and not leaving. That night, he was the one who took her home. Although more than a month had passed, Shuyi still clearly remembered that when he was helping her take off her high heels, she kicked him wildly while drinking, and accidentally kicked him. Then, her ankle was held by him. The warmth and roughness of the palm came at the same time, and Shuyi suddenly became like a puppet. But she seemed to be the only one who was stiff. You put her legs on the sofa and asked politely as usual, "Is there anything else I can help?" Looking back now, Shuyi still wants to slap herself. She didn't know why her brain was convulsed, and she said, "The underwear is too tight and uncomfortable." Why didn't she learn the ability to fragment after drinking? Shuyi pondered her embarrassment quietly like a chicken, but Shuyi had already revised the PPT, pulled out the USB flash drive, and patted her on the shoulder. "I won't tell you anymore, I'll go to the conference room to debug." Shuyi, "Oh, come on. There are still 20 minutes before the debriefing report begins." In addition to Shuyi, another colleague who had a job change was also preparing in the conference room. Seeing her come in, the male colleague stopped what he was doing and said with a smile, "Congratulations, Deputy Editor Jung." Shuyi was not familiar with this person, and felt a little embarrassed when he heard his congratulations. "The process hasn't finished yet, so please don't call it that. Someone will laugh at me if you hear it later." "Oh, what's wrong with this? The ironclad matter is settled by Deputy Editor-in-Chief Jung." The male colleague said so, but when he turned his head, he sneered like a changed face. He joined Kaijing Weekly a year earlier than Shuyi, and he is still working hard for the position of team leader, while Shuyi has already marched towards the deputy editor. When a person thinks that his talents are underappreciated, the efforts of others are all turned into clouds in the eyes. He only knew that the difference between himself and Shuyi was that he didn't have a great lover. Deputy editor is just the beginning, and Shuyi will no longer be at the same level as those who are struggling to find information resources. He has a boyfriend who stands at the top of the pyramid in the industry, so it's not easy to see which big boss he wants to meet in the future. It's not like they have to go through difficulties in ordering an interview, and they often suffer from cold eyes. Now Shuyi only needs to open his mouth, let alone an interview. Even if he wants to make an appointment for dinner, his boyfriend can arrange it immediately. Editor Jung, don't forget us old colleagues when you get rich in the future. As soon as he turned his head, the colleague put on a smiling face again. Don't refuse if you need help. These words sounded a bit sour. Shuyi could only deal with them casually. After a while, various leaders came in one after another. When Tang Yi passed by Shuyi, he patted her on the shoulder. Don't be nervous, you can do as usual, no problem. It has to be said that Tang Yi's words gave Shuyi a lot of confidence. With her sitting below, Shuyi finished the whole process without any jamming, his eyes were shining, and the PPT behind him was completely reduced to the background. The moment she put down the infrared pen, there was thunderous applause in the meeting room. "Is it over?" As soon as Shuyi came out, Kong Nan and Shuyi couldn't wait to come over. "How is it?" The cold wind in the office was chilly. She blew on the air conditioner for a while, suppressed her excitement, and said calmly, "It's okay, play steadily." Kong Nan and Shuyi said in unison, "Please." Shuyi said, "Okay, tomorrow night, you choose the place." Back at her workstation, Shuyi picked up a pen to write a weekly work report, but she didn't do it for a long time. Looking sideways at the bright sun outside the window, she lost her mind for a while. By the time she looked away, 10 minutes had passed. With a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, he even wrote the weekly work report that he usually hates most very quickly. 2 hours later, Shuyi raised his head, leaned on the chair relaxedly, with a calm expression, but sent 3 exclamation marks to Shi Yan. "Shuyi, I will treat guests to dinner tonight." "Shuyi, the place is up to you." "Shuyi, don't be polite to Editor-in-Chief Jung." After a while, Shi Yan only had the empty-eyed cell phone. He sent a voice message directly. "Bokuyenwen, is it okay?" Shuyi bent the corners of her lips. "All right, Editor Jung will cook for you personally." At the same time as the message was sent, an email came up on the computer. Shuyi clicked on it immediately, and the moment she saw the content clearly, her eyes froze on the screen. Thinking that she had read it wrong, she blinked her eyes and read out word by word silently. As if falling from a high altitude, Shuyi's whole body sank into a sense of weightlessness, and even the sunlight by the window suddenly disappeared with her mood changes. Subsequently, the message sent to Shi Yan was immediately withdrawn. Shuyi, no more food. Shuyi, your girlfriend is also autistic.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.